fantastic. So hello everybody. I can't see you, so I'm just kind of hoping that if anyone needs to contribute or maybe chip in or has any questions, that maybe they can field that to Rachel, and then Rachel, you can feed that to me. So like if I need to go a bit slower, or if there's anything that isn't clear, maybe if that gets passed on to Rachel, and then Rachel, you can tell me and we can get that fixed and covered. So thank you so much for inviting me to speak to you today a little bit about auditory verbal therapy. A little bit about me. My name is Emma Burton, as you can see on the slide, and I'm a specialist speech and language therapist. And so I joined Auditory Verbal Therapy, Auditory Verbal UK, about 3 years ago. And I have been training in-house in terms of working with families of children who are deaf, who want a listening and spoken language outcome through auditory verbal therapy. So I thought today that we're just going to flick through and have a bit more of a deep dive into what auditory verbal therapy actually is and what that might look like. And I know that you've got the slides as well. Is that right, Rachel? Does everybody have a copy of the slides?
Yeah, they've got access to them. Some people have printed them out, and some people are watching them on their laptops, and most people are watching it on screen.
Okay, fine. So I was just thinking that in terms of this being as useful for you guys as possible, please do feel free to interrupt me for a discussion, or if there's anything that you want to raise. And in terms of things that are going to be covered, if you've already looked through the slides, then you might have an idea of what's coming up anyway. So even if you've got questions at an earlier stage, you might know that gets touched on a little bit later. But either way, I want this to be as useful for you guys as possible. So if I just click through here, then I think the main things that we're going to have a bit of a look at today, and I'm hoping that you will be able to answer by the end of this session, is just what is auditory verbal therapy. So being able to answer that question, if anyone ever came across you and maybe was thinking about all different communication options. So I'm hoping that by the end of the session, you'll know what kind of information you might be able to give to parents who are wondering about auditory verbal therapy. And hopefully as well, we'll be able to think about how to really build that listening brain for children who are deaf. So we'll flick here. And at Auditory Verbal UK, I think one of our main aims, our key value, is that we want all deaf children to have the same opportunities in life as their hearing peers. And I think the way that we go about that is that auditory verbal therapists will coach parents to enable their children to listen and talk and develop the lifelong skills that they need to thrive at school and beyond. And with all of your experience from your training, you will already know that there is a vast continuum of communication approaches available for deaf children. And they range from the more visual to the more auditory. And I think one of the key things that might be interesting to explore is, how auditory verbal is different perhaps to an auditory oral approach. And I think if you think about it as the continuum, auditory verbal therapy is at the very far end of the most auditory approaches. So I think in terms of the difference, it would be that there is a control perhaps for more visual cues, and that doesn't mean using a hand cue or withholding gesture, but I think it's thinking about audition first at every possible instance, and then using that to really build the auditory connections, and coaching parents to be the ones developing that in their everyday life. Was that?
Can I just stop you a moment, Emma, because we're not seeing the slides. We were seeing the slides and then they went off.
Oh no.
It could be that I have to do the slides at this end, which is fine if you just tell me when to progress the slides. The call is clear, but
let me.
Would you like to show me, Mara? Because I can't see which box you mean. That one?
Oops. So is it moving now?
It's not on screen.
Right.
No, yeah, I've clicked. Ah, right. Okay.
what's happening for you guys?
Okay, we can see now the continuum that you were talking about.
And if I moved it back, would you see our vision?
Yes?
Yes.
And now the continuum?
Yeah, it's working.
Yes. Okay, good. Amazing. Thank you for letting me know. So hopefully this should continue to work if I'm flicking through. But obviously, if it stops, please let me know, and I will try and fix it. I'm not sure what I've done. I've just clicked the taking over presenter, but let's not question it. Let's just continue. So yeah, so I think obviously there are some statistics behind the approach and why we offer this as an option for families. And I won't labour these because I'm sure they're all very familiar to you. I just wanted to run through them a little bit just so you know where auditory verbal therapy sits within the context. So in the UK, like many other countries, deaf children are still starting school without listening and talking skills that will enable them to reach their full potential. And in the UK, only 34% of deaf children were recorded as having achieved a good level of development. And this is really low, I think, when compared to 76% of children who, are being. Oh, sorry, my screen is picked up. If I move this here, with no special educational needs. Sorry. So I think that the knock-on effect, really, for children and their education is that 61% of deaf children are leaving primary school having failed to achieve the expected standard in reading and writing and maths, compared to the 30% of children with no special educational needs. And for us, what we're really thinking about is we know that the gap between the achievement of deaf pupils and those with no special educational needs is widening, and we're thinking about, well, what can we do to really target that? So AV therapy is really based on early identification and early amplification and early intervention. And we really want to ensure that deaf children and their parents are given the opportunity just to be ready to hit primary school with all the tools that they need so they can really excel in that environment. And so that really means looking at helping them have, stay on top of that language development, developing the literacy skills and the numeracy skills and all the social emotional skills that they're going to need in that school environment. I think what we're really saying with this is some of the recent research was saying that 80% of the children who spent at least 2 years on the AV programme had age-appropriate language by the age of 5 years. And this ties in really closely, I think if I click through here, too far, with another study that was done in Australia, which also is indicating roughly a similar figure of attainment that, that children with hearing impairment, and that's including children with special educational needs and additional needs, can meet the requirements really in terms of starting school with the age-appropriate language. So this is really the slide, and again, I know that you've got the handout, so I won't bore you with the details, but it's really, this is the kind of slide that's looking through the First Voice study. We're seeing similar observations in Australia, so with much larger cohorts than ours. And again, on the First Voice study, the average is about 2 years. So I think it's really interesting that the data across, like internationally, is really tying together and providing the same sort of outcomes. But I think that there are references at the ends of the presentation if you wanted to follow that up any further. I think in terms of, that's really the context of where AV sits. But in terms of what AV looks like, I think the 3 key areas to look at are listening and language, the auditory aspect, the parent coaching aspect, and then the child development aspect. And so when we're thinking about how AV is perhaps different, I think the key thing would be that it's all about audition first. So audition is the primary modality to be learning about everything in their environment. And absolutely thinking about coaching the family. And we'll speak a little bit more about that as we have a look through these in greater detail. So the first aspect of the auditory verbal approach is listening. And it's really thinking about how the brain can fully appreciate all the aspects of spoken language. Daniel Ling, who we love at AV, is saying that audition is really the only sense capable of appreciating all the aspects of speech, so that if we want really crystal clear speech, what we really need is for them to have fantastic access to those speech sounds through optimal technology and the rehabilitation package that works for that child and that family. And I think that this was filling in the caption, but again, as I know that you already have the slides, you may be able to fill in the answers, and you may have those in front of you already. The caption is, "We listen with our brain." And this is really something that Dr. Carol Flexer, I'm going to say, drilled into us when she came to present earlier the other year. And she's a world-renowned audiologist. If you haven't come across her already, I'm not sure. But she's really saying that behind hearing loss is a brain that has the capacity to be stimulated and interpret sound. And she kind of used a metaphor like it's like being given a mansion, but on your way in, the key breaks in the lock. And just because you can't get into the mansion doesn't mean that you would maybe not try to get in. So it's thinking about that, how if we're wanting to get a auditory brain, what we really need to do is get our way to get the information into that brain, and really prioritizing that as an approach. And in terms of the neuroscience, unfortunately, we're working against the clock when it comes to developing an auditory brain, as you already know. But I really love this image, and it's illustrating. Have you come across this research by Sharma? Is this familiar?
No. Most people are saying no.
Okay, so it's, it's
actually talked about a sensitive period for language development, but not particularly Sharma's work.
Okay, fantastic. So yeah, they're really just looking at it really does tie into that sensitive period. But Shara has got this looking at the neural connections, and it's illustrating how the baby's brain starts to make connections in these neural synapses, and these start to occur even before the child is born. And so, I'm preaching to the converted here, but I think it's just really worthwhile reminding ourselves that we just really need to, if a listening and spoken language approach is what is desired by the family for that child, then it's just worth reminding ourselves that we really need to get in and start creating those connections for auditions as early as possible. Because we can see and we know that very quickly the brain starts to prune and get rid of unnecessary information. And we know that from several research studies into neuroplasticity that the brain reorganizes itself and the auditory cortex is taken over by sight and by touch unless it's stimulated during this brief sensitive period. I just really like this illustration. I think it makes it really clear. Again, we can just skim through this, I suppose. The purpose of technology is, that it gives a child's brain high quality access to speech, because that's how we're stimulating the brain's auditory pathways. And we're speaking the way that we hear. So if we want good quality spoken language, then we need a good quality signal at all times. And this is really thinking about, we always want to know functionally what they can hear. So every single session at the beginning, we'll always be thinking of doing a Ling check as the very basic of speech perception before anything further. We're always checking, we're validating the technology and making sure that what the child, I think I've just skipped there, what the child's audiogram is linking up to functionally what we're seeing in clinic, and if not, then why not? And just maintaining those really good connections with the whole team. So with the teachers of the deaf and the speech language therapists and the teachers of the deaf, everybody just working really closely together. So we know that the majority of vocabulary is just learned through overhearing, and we really need to be looking at the aided audiogram, but just really making sure that we're checking their access, with each, either in single or together, but also in quiet and with noise and close and at distance. So it's being really diagnostic. And then once we know that there's good auditory access to speech, then we can really start working on interpreting those sounds. And I think one of the key ways that we work with auditory verbal in particular is through a really clear knowledge of the speech acoustics. So what we want to do is be looking at that child's audiogram, thinking about, in terms of their speech acoustics, what we might be expecting them to have access to, what sounds might be more tricky, what processes, what features of language might be missing, or what might be more accessible, and really kind of predicting from the audiogram what we might expect functioning in terms of their understanding and spoken language abilities. So we really want to be very, very technical in terms of knowing that we're working within the child's abilities, but also stretching them. And I think it's easy for us as adults to forget how complex understanding language could be. And so we're always thinking about, okay, how can we help a child to feel really successful in the session? Because that's how I think all of us as learners feel confidence in terms of developing that understanding. And I have a video here to show you, which is looking particularly at checking for understanding. Has it come up on your screen ready to play?
Yes, yes.
Yes, fantastic. So this is going to be a video about with a little girl called Lexi, and she's 3 years and 5 months old. Her hearing age is 1 year, and she's been on the AV program for 6 months. And I would just encourage you to look out for the words that Lexi's understanding in this video. And if she's understanding based on hearing, and maybe how do we know this? So if you maybe have a look out for that, and then we can have a discussion just at the end. I'm just going to play.
Need some water. Sit over there. Okay, I'll tell you what. You want book or water? I know. So, if we can help, what I'm going to do is both and the what you do. Honey, do you want book or water? Okay. Very good. Okay. Should we do this? What should I do?
Uh-oh.
What do I do? in this plan.
Okay, so would anyone like to volunteer maybe what they thought she was understanding through listening?
She looked around the room for water.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a really, I think you're right. It's an absolutely clear response to, she'd heard water, but she was looking forward at the toys that they were all playing with. So she had a visual distractor. Everyone was thinking about the same thing, but upon hearing water, absolutely, she was thinking, well, where is that? And started searching for it immediately. So I think we're thinking about giving her ideas, checking in and seeing how she can show us her understanding. There's lots of things in terms of the parent coaching and the proximity and the strategies that we might look at just in a little bit further along in this presentation. But we're absolutely thinking about, in every session, getting a really good feel for what a child's receptive vocabulary is, and what is through listening, and maybe what is context, and maybe what needs an auditory sandwich. So we're always thinking about, okay, well, where are they now? How can we push them to the next step? So I think one of the key areas of auditory verbal therapy is absolutely the parent coaching. So nobody really learns language by seeing a therapist once a fortnight. And in auditory verbal therapy, we make this really clear to the parents that, that they're going to be the ones that will be making all the difference. And our role as a therapist is really to coach them into using the strategies that are going to really stimulate that listening and spoken language. And I think for me, as very recently being a student speech and language therapist myself, I remember having a really beautiful session with a young girl where I'd identified that she couldn't produce the K, and she was producing it instead. And so I'd use minimal pairs to check that she could hear the difference. I showed her how to produce a K in isolation, and then into syllables, and then in words. And I'd explain to the parent what she needed to do, and gave the parents some worksheets and activities to take away. And I left feeling really proud of myself. But I think it's knowing what is explaining and what is really coaching. For me, being trained in the AV approach was just a really huge turning point in terms of how to give parents success in the moment and be guiding them as they are the ones carrying out the activities, so that they can receive guidance in the moment, maybe to alter their strategy slightly, but then they've got a much higher chance of using that in their everyday life, because for the session, they've been the ones having the conversations, they've been the one teaching their child new things, and they've been the one really moving that child's listening and spoken language forward. So I think in AV, we will sometimes carry out, play with the child, but I think we're really thinking about making the goals really clear, handing the activities over to the parent, so the parent is experiencing how to use those strategies firsthand. And I think that's the reason why we're really able to use teletherapy so effectively, because we don't really need to be with the child. It's essentially what the parent is taking away from each session that's going to be making the difference. I think, again, every session is individual and tailored. So we know that every child is different and every parent is different. And because it's a parent coaching program, we're really thinking about what kind of learning style each parent will have. Some parents really like to observe and reflect before trying something new, where others want to just really get stuck in straight away and receive that guidance in the moment. And I think no two families' journeys will really be the same, and no two sessions are really the same. I've had sessions where all a child wants to do is rip up sheets of paper, and we've made that into a session, and we've thought about how to add in that language. And I think the key thing is that it's tailored to the needs of the parent and to the needs and the interest of the child, and kind of thinking about how to help that parent move through the typical developmental hierarchy. So we're following those typical developmental patterns, but we're also really wanting to accelerate that development. So we're wanting to make sure that a child is making at least 6 months language growth over 6 months. But what we're really looking for is maybe 7 or 9, or in some cases 12 over 6, because we're trying to, for those families maybe that were later diagnosed or receive that technology later, we're trying to close that language gap. And we're just really regularly tracking that progress through diagnostic observation and standardised language assessments. So I think we have one-to-one diagnostic sessions, so it's an hour per fortnight. That's how it typically looks on our regular programme. And extended family members are always welcome to come along and attend. So we've had siblings and grandparents and aunts and uncles, but it's really thinking about coaching the adults in that environment to be the ones supporting the child. And I have a video here that hopefully we can use this to reflect on some of the key points. So this, as the information will show you on the slide, is Bobby. It's his first appointment. He's come for an initial session with his mum and dad. He's profoundly deaf. You can read that all there for yourself. I think what I would encourage you to look out for in this video is the seating of all of those present in the session, how the therapist, how Louise is handing over to the parent, and maybe just think about how you think the parent might be feeling at the end of this clip. So I'll just play it now and then we can get a bit of feedback at the end.
Does it ask for more? With more? Does it use more? And does it, would you use Play-Doh? You know Play-Doh? Would you say, would it just say Play-Doh if you want more?
No, just
Can we teach you how to, if we can, so you want to be more Play-Doh lines? So if you lean in and go, Play-Doh, so you're giving the word the label that you need to ask for. Yeah, yeah. So I love you, can you use Play-Doh? And keep your point and say, Terry's Play-Doh. Play-Doh. Just wait. Keep your position, keep your finger. No. Play-Doh. It wasn't Play-Doh, it was a verbal contribution. And it wasn't more, was it more?
No,
it was something. Do you think it sounded like Play-Doh?
no, but it definitely wasn't any more.
No.
No.
Very different. Good, good. So he's learning, because you're using him as neural pathways of everything has a name, and I call things by their name. With me? Play-Doh.
Good.
But what it did have was the intonation drop. 2 syllables. That's important to show. The subtitles were not quite accurate, but it did have the intonation drop and 2 syllables, which is what it didn't have at the start.
So I can hear that you're talking about the subtitles. I agree that it doesn't really indicate that he's started imitating that model from his mum, does it? Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, yes,
Great. So in terms of the seating, what did you think about that? Any thoughts?
Yeah, one of the people in the class is saying it's strange they're sitting at a table with that aged child, and maybe more normally that might happen on the floor.
Okay, yeah, so I think we are quite flexible in terms of how that works. So we've got a range of different like sensory rooms to be on the floor. I think sometimes when children we might do a little bit of seated work, just because what we want is for them to be feeling quite grounded. So they've got more brain space to be listening. Sometimes when we've had children moving around, that urge to be on the move can sometimes impact what they're able to show us their understanding through listening. But yeah, that is a good point. So it's one of those where, you know, where is that child typically in their home environment? Maybe, you know, as you're saying, it might be on more of a free moving situation. I think we do often have children who are quite small seated at the table for some time, but they might be only there for a short period of time, and you might move and do something more physical and move around. I think the key thing for those is that Louise is as the therapist, is not the one next to Bobby. So she's got each parent, these key people either side of him, and they're supporting him and guiding him and observing him, and she's really just on the periphery. And in terms of...
He's tucked in at the table so that there's not too many distractions, and his mum is pretty near implant.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're thinking about that proximity, that clear auditory access, and making sure that he's got the best possible signal at these early stages. Yeah, absolutely.
Poppy, do you want to raise the question about what you said about the hearing age? We wanted to find out when this little boy's implants were turned on. How long ago was it?
I don't know off the top of my head, but I can absolutely get back to you.
You said hearing age at the beginning, and we didn't. Not everyone knows that term, hearing age.
Oh, okay. So I can't see the slide here. Let me see. So hearing age, 7 months.
So he was 20 months now, and he had the cochlear implants maybe turned on 7 months ago, or maybe he had hearing aids 7 months ago.
So I'm thinking, what I don't want to do is give you wrong information. So because I don't know the exact details of that child here, what I can do is just email that over to you afterwards. Is that okay? Because otherwise, I'm just gonna guess. And so I can email that.
The implant 7 months ago, I would think.
I mean, that would make sense, but I don't know for sure. So what is that? Did somebody have a comment about it?
Yeah.
And how do you think that the mum is feeling at the end of the clip?
Pretty positive, the general feedback is.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I really like about this is that, that smile on her face at the end as her little boy who'd had maybe just one approximation, and that was for more, and who from her model, so it wasn't Louise teaching her boy something new, it was her voice, and it was her showing him how to get the thing that he wanted by, getting closer to that model. I think it was that pride, and I think for me that really just kind of sums up that parent coaching piece, that it's the parent is the one who is in the moment, using the strategies, being nice and close, using the acoustic highlighting, that sing-song voice to highlight the words that he needs, and then he changes his approximation and gets that reward. So yeah, absolutely.
And what he got was a very clear intonation drop and 2 syllables, which he previously hadn't had, and that was quite impressive after only a few minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's thinking about his motivation is high. He really wants that Play-Doh. It's his mum's voice, and so he's really kind of motivated and connected and listening and tuned into what she's saying. She's lovely and close, so he's getting best possible access. Yeah, it's all of these. She's using the highlighting to really extend the duration and add more acoustic information to those vowels of Play-Doh so he's got more opportunity for his brain to process it and to really develop his auditory feedback loop and come back with this. So yeah, those are really, really good thoughts. Shall I click onto child development and play, or did anybody else have any questions or comments about the video? Are we ready to move on to this slide?
I was just going to say that I was quite glad the way the seating was it so that the boy couldn't see his mum and see what she was saying, she couldn't lip read. But I was quite glad that she wasn't sitting with her hand over her mouth, because I think that looks really restrictive.
Did you hear that okay, Emma?
Yeah, I'm leaning in close to here, but I think...
So she could sit, the boy was sitting next to the mum, but could still see the mum's face.
Yeah, and I think that's the key thing, that with auditory, although with auditory oral it might be more access to face in terms of like sitting opposite and having access to those cues. Auditory verbal, although we're thinking about, well, what is like prioritizing audition and thinking, well, what is going in through audition alone? What we're definitely not doing is sitting encouraging parents to adopt really unnatural behaviour. So it's really thinking about, you're sitting close to somebody, you're all looking at the same thing and sharing that same experience, but using that as the opportunity to be auditory, like you say, rather than doing something like this, which we don't do for typically hearing children. So it's not something that we really want to encourage for our children that aren't typically hearing. So yeah, that's a really good observation, that it's quite, you can be auditory and still be really natural. Any other questions or comments?
No, we're all right.
Okay, great. So I think you all know about child development and play, and that children really, especially in the preschool years, learn most through play. Although there's all the different types, you've got the free play and child directed, and I think the key thing is for AV, what we really do is guided play. So we play with the purpose of ensuring that the child is showing new learning, but whilst also giving them control over the play and making it enjoyable as well as cognitively stimulating. So we're really thinking about following their lead, but being sure that we're purposeful, thinking about the goals. And so all sessions are play-based, but what we do is really tie the listening into those play activities, which vary depending on the age and stage and motivation of each child. So I think this slide is really just illustrating the key areas that we include in all of our play sessions. So from Piaget's cognitive development theory to Vygotsky and his ZPD, I think we're really thinking about how we can use that to really bring families together and help families feel really confident supporting that listening and spoken language in things that the child is enjoying, but also their regular everyday routines. So, when we're thinking about problem solving, we're very keen on problems, and we're really thinking about helping children be really good problem solvers, because we're wanting them to. It'll start off at early stages with the cause and effect, and something's gone. But we're really thinking as children get much older, we're really thinking about those more social problems of how to, with communication breakdown or people liking or disliking different things, and how to really overcome those. In terms of the zone of proximal development, if a game isn't within the child's cognitive reach, either if it's too difficult or too simple, then their child's interest is going to be very short-lived. So we're thinking about, okay, how can we be so diagnostic in terms of hitting that level that's familiar enough to them, but adding in new things. And motivation really links in with a child's zone of proximal development and the problem solving. So they really do need to be motivated by a particular game or toy. So, if a 4-year-old is going through a Spider-Man phase, then pretending to be Spider-Man is going to be more motivating than pretending to be a farmer or, anything else that we're thinking of doing. And I think in terms of the guided play, it's just really a delicate balance between allowing the child to lead the play, but also assisting them to learn new skills. So it's not quite instructing them what to do, but it also isn't free play where the child is just left to do what they like, and as adults we're following them around. And as therapists, our role is to really make diagnostic observations as we're going through the session. So the therapist is observing how the child is playing and what is needed to move on to the next level of play. And I think the clip that I've got next to show you should kind of illustrate how all of these are tied together in an auditory way. So in this video, you'll see a little boy called Jake, and he's playing a new game called Jacks. The therapist, Noel, has initiated the game by presenting the things to Jake, but then he really allows him to explore it and come up with ideas of his own. And you'll notice that halfway through, once Jake's explored all the options, the therapist he comes in and takes the game up to a new level to maintain his interest and using that to target the language goals. So let's take a look at Jake playing Jacks. So I think he's a natural Jack's champion, hey? Any thoughts or observations about the play and any, his language, the goals, any questions or discussions?
Notice how Noel, like he was saying, the boy was saying fall, and he was then saying, oh yes, it fell on the floor, and then he would mimic back. So that's sort of like past tense he was using.
Yeah, sure. So he's noticing and keeping a log of those errors. So at any one time, there's always a million different things we can target. So Noel is thinking, yeah, I'm going to recast that back, make a note, and then really help him focus on, some of those things like using those full sentences, rehearsing the plan, and explaining the game rules in 3 parts, and those kind of vocabulary pieces. But yeah, absolutely, he's just kind of doing that. He's listening, modelling it back, and giving Jake that opportunity to practice, for sure.
Noel was saying, and he was also using questions to prompt more discussion from the wee boy.
So Rachel, I didn't quite catch all of that one.
Yes, the student is saying Noel was very good at using "and" as a question and to elicit more from the boy. So that there was a pause and he said more.
Absolutely. So yeah, that's sort of a now. So it's thinking, it's going, yeah, okay, tell me more. So I think absolutely it's those, it's giving Jake lots of opportunity to practice using his language by encouraging him to kind of fill in those gaps. So it's definitely a really key thing that we're thinking about is at any time what we in this particular clip, I think Noel is talking more, but what we're over the whole session, we kind of think about it as a bit of a pie where you'd want at least a third, but actually as the coach, you want to be taking much less of your slice because it's the child who really needs that opportunity to practice. So any opportunity to push that conversation turn back over to the child is always a fantastic thing to do.
I thought Noel was very good at eliciting more talk from the child, but the mum wasn't nearly so involved in this clip as in the previous one.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. So I do know this family, and I think the mum is going to be engaged. I think in this clip it was definitely thinking about Jake and his play, but I agree it's thinking about involving the mum and her leading the play. So often in sessions we'll think about being diagnostic and finding the right level and then handing that over to the parent. So what I can imagine is in this session that she would take more of an active role at a later part, but Noel's kind of checking in and thinking, okay, so how are you at rehearsing the plan? How are you about having your play pushed in and having ideas to extend it? And how are you at communicating that to another person? But yeah, I agree.
Also from a language point of view, how old is this boy?
So I think he's about 4. Is he on this? I can't remember if it said on the beginning of the video.
Because he's actually, the task of explaining rules in a game is quite age appropriate for 4 or 5. It's not like simplifying the language too much, but it is aiming for one of the things you'd expect kids at that age to be doing, which is actually be able to explain the rules of a game.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's really thinking about pragmatics, isn't it? So we're thinking about, yes, we want you to have good understanding, we want you to have lovely vocabulary, to use all the grammar that you need to use, but particularly what our main focus on is your pragmatics. Why are you using your language? And I think it's to tell somebody a story, explain how to do a process, play a game, invite people to play, negotiate your turn. So it's really thinking about why and how he's using his language, and exactly as you say, thinking, okay, so these are the kind of things that the language your peers are going to be using. How can we help skill him up so he's got those skills too? Rachel, I'm just wondering about the time.
Yeah, we're coming up to the end of the hour and we do have a few other things to go through, so maybe wrap it up fairly soon, Emma, in about 5 minutes or so.
So I wanted to check in.
How far are we on? The video clips are really useful.
Yeah, I think there's only a couple more slides left, and there's a longer video at the end. So I'm thinking if 5 minutes is perfect, then if we click through here, So I think this slide is really thinking, a lot of people ask us what age can you start AVT? And I think our main message is, well, as soon as they receive their hearing technology. So we've had babies as young as 5 weeks old start on the programme, although I think the youngest that I've ever worked with is 4 months. And we also know that you can start sharing books with your baby from very early on. And this is all part of paving the way for stronger language and literacy. We know that babies love looking at people's faces, and books that feature babies' faces are really popular, even with babies as young as 4 months of age. So my very clever colleague, Francis, took all this information and decided to ask for photos of children from families on our programme and create a book with baby faces of children with the hearing technology. So all the babies are children who have attended AVUK, they're all using technology, and it's also got language ideas to really promote that literacy in language. And I just wondered if it would be useful just to show you a video of, books being used with much younger children. So maybe if I'll show you, this might be the last video that we get to, but I can show you this video of Callum, who's 9 months old in this video clip. And the therapist is coaching the parents on using the baby book with Callum, so targeting talking ahead and awakening auditory attention, interacting with the book, using learning to listen sounds, and that vocal turn taking, so allowing time for Callum to respond verbally. So let's have a look at this, and then maybe a little bit of a discussion, and then we can tie it all up.
How does it look? And what kind of books do you like? Storybooks. Coming out of those touchy-feely books as well. Okay. What I've got is a book with baby faces. So we will do some talking ahead. And if you want to open the book and then open it and show them. Hello, look. Wow, 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 wow. Oh, wow, wow, wow. Oh, wow. Wow, wow, wow. Yeah, wow, wow, wow. Wow, wow, wow. Wow, wow, wow. Wow, wow, wow. Really interesting. So before we see this, if you even drink it with eating with your wine. Hello. 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 Just when you go from that, the first thing you put down because you're so interested in that book. So in the books, 60 minutes is always giving the word what you and then you have a good chance to really look at it and engage with it. And then you can do things with them as well. So I'm going to do And then we can Hannah, we're going to do the shh, 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 shh. No, and Daddy. And Mommy.
So he's just adorable. And just before we just wrap this up for today, is there anything that anyone really wanted to share, or any questions quickly?
Yeah, there were a few questions. Poppy, you had a question.
So all of the clips that we showed were cochlear implant users. Do you work with any children who are only hearing aid users rather than cochlear implant users?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I'm not sure if it's half and half. We might have, it might be more 60-70, like 60-40, 70-30 more cochlear implant users. But yeah, we see children with moderate hearing loss with hearing aids, to severe hearing loss with hearing aids, to children with cochlear implants. So it's really for children with a permanent sensory neural hearing loss who has access to sound through technology and whose families want a listening and spoken language outcome. They're kind of the families that we tend to work with at AVUK.
So are there no profoundly deaf children with hearing aids that you work with?
I think if children have, I think when we're seeing children who might have a profound hearing loss and have hearing aids, it tends to be on the pathway for cochlear implant assessment. I don't think we have any children with a profound hearing loss who have hearing aids and that's their mode.
But not all profoundly deaf children can have cochlear implants because of the nerves. If the nerve is missing, then obviously a cochlear implant is not going to be appropriate for those children. So that the option for them might be more limited, this particular therapy option. So
I think for auditory verbal therapy, they just need to have access to audition, essentially. So what kind of technology, are you thinking of a particular family?
She was thinking of a child who doesn't have an auditory nerve, which is, you do come across that. That is somebody who's not suitable for an implant, but they might be profoundly deaf.
Yes, so is that on both sides?
It's somebody who wouldn't be, if they've got no nerve there, how would the information then be passed to the brain? I'm just thinking about how the cochlear implant works specifically, so the information from that nerve wouldn't be there to get the information to the brain. So I'm just wondering what the option for AV therapy would be for that kind of child.
Yes, so I'm thinking in terms of the technology. Is it so it's on one side, or is it there's no nerves like bilaterally? So it's not just that there's one ear that doesn't have an auditory nerve, but they've got access to sound through the other side, or is it they have no auditory nerve on either side?
It would be on both sides.
Okay, so I think the primary thing for all children is that they have a communication mode. So in terms of auditory verbal therapy, I think with all approaches, there's no one size that fits everybody. I think auditory verbal therapy is a really viable option for families that want listening and spoken language, but when the children can access optimal auditory information. So I think if that child isn't able to access information in an auditory modality, then probably auditory verbal therapy wouldn't be the right approach for them. But we would work with families who maybe were en route to getting full optimal auditory access. But no, for families who don't have optimal auditory access, we wouldn't promote auditory verbal therapy because a child needs to be able to communicate. And I think when we're working with families, what we would do is have an initial conversation with families before they join the programme to kind of look at that journey so far and the etiology and their type and degree of hearing loss, and determine what options are going to be the best for their family and for that child. So obviously I don't know that particular family, but I'm just thinking broadly, if a child doesn't have access to auditory information, then an auditory only approach I would imagine is not the right approach for that family.
Okay, thanks, Emma. Has anyone got any last questions they'd like to know? Yes?
I'd like to know what an auditory sandwich is.
The sandwich, auditory sandwich.
Yeah, sure. So I was thinking of when we're trying to check in about what a child is understanding through listening alone, when perhaps they might have been using sign before or relying on context. What we might do is, if we knew that if we wanted to check whether they knew ball, we might, before we get the ball out and the child can see a ball, we might say, oh, we're going to get a ball. And then if it was sign, you might be like, yeah, we're going to get that ball. Oh yeah, we're going to get that. And then back into listening, we're going to get the ball, and then you bring the ball out. So you're talking ahead, stimulating the auditory pathways first, then using the visual or the context or whatever they needed as like the filling of the sandwich, if you like. So you've got audition, the cue, audition, and then you're bringing out the object. So it's just something that we're thinking, if a child has an understanding already, perhaps with a sign or a gesture, we would be helping them build their understanding through listening by giving them the listening first, then giving them what they understand, like what they've already got in their vocabulary, and then going back into listening and then showing them the item. Does that make sense?
I think we've seen a lot of very interesting techniques on those video clips. It was really useful.
Oh, great. So I think there's a whole range of different AV strategies, and if you ever wanted to know any more, obviously you can email us or be in touch and maybe just reflect amongst yourselves and think about what you've seen. And I hope that this was helpful for today. I know it's been a little bit of a run through. I think we were pretty much at the end anyway. We just had one more video, just kind of thinking about, I think, which only really illustrated, it was a bit of a promo video that was done, but I think the key point is that it illustrates, it's not just for middle class families of a particular background, it's for children from different socioeconomic status, different backgrounds, different additional needs. It's not, but I think ultimately it's for families that want a listening and spoken language outcome, and for children that have auditory access. I think those are probably the key things.
We've got one more question.
Yes.
From one of the students.
Okay.
What do you do with a baby of 5 weeks old?
So I think with a baby of 5 weeks old, as we looked at with our Venn diagram, I think one of the biggest pieces is the parent coaching. So at that age, what we would be spending most of our time doing, it would be thinking through with parents, where their journey has been so far, helping them really get to grips with the technology and problem solving those, thinking about, doing functional listening and helping them start already using some of those auditory sandwiches, auditory strategies. I can't speak now, it's the end of a day on a Friday. Auditory strategies like the acoustic highlighting, but primarily it would be a parent coaching piece. So I think Yeah, I think when we're working with families, like it's rare that we would see children that young, because often, I think it's getting the diagnosis and then getting the hearing technology. And for most families, they would still be thinking about, or what is it that they want. I think that particular case is for a family who's came for AVT with their first child, and when their second child was born, I think they were already kind of on top of, is there a hearing loss? And I think that when their child was born, I think they text one of the therapists that worked here saying, like, our child is deaf, like, how can we access the program? So I think it's a rare case that we see children 5 weeks, but essentially because it's parent coaching and we're just really supporting the parents to switch on that listening and be really able to advocate for their child, I think it can start at any age, really. But I hope that this was useful today. I really love the opportunity to come and speak with you all. If there's anything that maybe any thoughts you had, my contact details are here, so drop me a message and I'll do my best to answer anything. But otherwise, Rachel will field all of the questions you might have.
Okay, thank you very much, Emma. That was really enjoyable. Thanks very much.
Okay, great. Thank you. Enjoy your weekend and bye all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
That worked. How did